Hey everybody, the Philosophy Society, Achilles Justice here. It's November 15th, 2023. We're in room 661B of the Toronto Metropolitan University Library. I have some people in the room, people online. And today, there was one topic that was suggested, so I'm going to begin generally and then segue into that. So we have some deductive reasoning that we can follow. Oh, I know this guy. I swear I met you somewhere. Hey, did we take?
Hey, how are you?
Here, move this back a little bit.
I'm being used.
That is, was there, your name's not on it anymore, but
There, figured if I could take the wheels anyone. I'll take the wheels.
okay. So today we're talking about the concept of feeling, which I'm going to distinguish from emotion. And there is some ambiguity in this term
What do you mean by that?
and how it's used. So someone can say, I don't feel good, right? And really what they mean to say is like, I'm upset or sad, right? Sorry, I was gonna check.
Or something bothers you, or you sick,
Or if you,
pain.
what if you can't define it?
So I,
You know what it is. You feel like you're bad, but you don't know what exactly what emotion it is.
exactly, that's why I'm saying it this way. Because there is something that is being detected, right? So when we go back to the being person here, right? It's almost like they have this like this feeling kind of radar. So there's like the body and the mind, and emotions are kind of part of the mind in some way. Emotions can have some like effect on the body, that with anxiety and different other kinds of things.
Well, everything is kind of energy based physics wise, right?
Okay.
So
Yes.
emotion is energy in motion.
Yeah, sure.
So that's
Say
how it
that.
affects the body because we're energetical beings and we have our own electromagnetic field, just like everything kind of does.
Mhm.
So energy in motion will affect our whole physiology. And you can notice it in rooms too. Like when someone is like very, very like excited, like other people feel the excitement too, or if someone's feeling really shit.
Mhm.
And the crying, for example, you're gonna start feeling bad too.
Mhm.
'Cause it's
Yeah. So there's like, so we can talk about group feelings. And in here we have the properties of mirror neurons. Okay. So there can be events like in the world, something that happens. And we kind of detect this event. Right? And so in David Burns, we learned how our cognitions or the way we perceive things, right? We will interpret certain information from those perceptions, and then emotions or feelings will be yielded from that way we perceive stuff. And so there's different kinds of emotions. There's like being sad, being angry, being happy, having anxiety. There's disgust. Just, you know, in general. So these emotions, these are our emotions. But feeling is not necessarily a direct relation to emotion. Feeling is like the thing that senses the emotion. So feeling is like this, and the emotion is inside. So feeling is almost like awareness, right? So you could logically replace the term, I'm aware of this emotion. I feel this emotion. And then the logic almost is the same, right? So when we're feeling stuff, we have these emotions that are occurring. Now, the emotions can occur in the self. You're the one experiencing it. Or you observe some other person, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I got angry recently, and specifically for you. And I wanted to tie in, how do we deal with when somebody else is angry, and what do we do when we're angry, right?
don't tell them to calm down.
Well,
That's the one thing you don't know.
yeah, like we can talk about that. It depends on your relationship with the person and the degree of trust, right? Because if you have a strong degree of trust, it could be like a safe word, and the person will know to take a time out or whatever and then relax, right? So I don't want to just dispel that completely. I think there is room for that, right? So something like, so how can happiness be bad? Well, the person could be manic, right? That's not. And it's,
Manic is happy.
it's like elated, over exaggerated happiness. Like they're talking a lot. They're very excited. They may be very impulsive in those moments.
I don't know. I had a different definition.
Yeah, a lot of energy. I'm just saying on a spectrum.
They can feel and be happy.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Yeah, manage to.
Manic? I don't know that.
The point is just that we want to have a balance of the emotion, right? And so when we sense some emotion, we can kind of place it on some spectrum and then determine whether or not it's healthy for us. So it's not to say that all sadness is bad or all anxiety is bad. In some ways, it's what we do with when we feel something, it's what we do with those things that we feel that can turn them into something good. Okay, so I'm going to continue with this in a moment, but I want to address what you brought up, right? So there's events and then there's situations, right? So there's before I was writing like on this part of the board, how we can find ourselves in some kind of position. Now, event is another way to say it is occurrence. So like there's a fire or I got fired.
Wouldn't be classified as a situation as well?
So so if we look at like a graph, this is time, right? And time is going in this direction. The event occurs right here. Whereas a situation is the present, is a moment that you are in. So you are situated with certain properties, and within this moment, it could be in the future, like I will be in a situation, or I was in a situation, right? So I can think back, which is reflection, and I can look in the future and kind of project what may occur, and then plan for it. And then we can engage in, the function of like visualization for like the optimum or the ideal behavior or how to act. And the reason for that is you want to have the best outcome. So this is like a consequential approach, right? I'm visualizing.
Is a situation a longer event, basically? That's a state.
Yeah, the state is in the individual. The situation is what the individual is in. They're situated in something. And so this is a situation here in this room, right? I've come here to explain some things, to talk about some stuff, with the assumption that there will be people who expect me to say something of value, right? I could sing, but that's not why we're here. Yeah.
So something about visualization. I remember a few weeks ago, there was this conversation about visualizing the ideal outcome.
Mhm.
They're saying 5 years down the road,
One more time.
5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And criticism towards that was that, well, it can make a person rigid if they are visualizing something.
Okay.
So that wasn't necessarily my criticism, but it was brought up in this session. So how do you reconcile that? If you think that's something that you
Rigidity as an issue, right? Or we could say like unrealistic expectations. So one way to rigidity on there, we could be determined, right? Like I can exercise willpower towards a goal or use my willpower to focus on a principle and inhibit current negative, like I use my self-control not to do unto like addictions, for example, or to like make sound decisions. I want to do this, but it's more constructive to do this, right? So I can be rigid with certain positive properties, which is another way to say determination, right? Or I can have unrealistic expectations, right? Like I will achieve this goal. And in the concept that you were bringing up, so the reason I'm bringing up situations is there's a situation of waiting, right? So that's where that goes, right? There may be an event that creates the situation, usually, right? Now, when we talk about rigidity, that is important. That's maybe the inability to disengage from some way of observing things or looking at the world, like rigid thinking. So if someone believes, so the rigidity up here. So this person believes X, but X is not true, right? And Y is true. For them to shift to the belief in Y, they're not able to do that. That's like an example of rigid thinking. Okay. And that can be a problem because you're not integrating new evidence into your belief system. So we can talk about rigidity in that context. And then with expectations, right? So for example, in the David Burns stuff, he talks about two things. One is process versus outcome orientation, right? As a solution to this. And what we want to do in this context is focus on the process. And you can be rigid about that or be determined. Like rigid, we maybe have a negative connotation in this, that's usually used. But really what we mean to say is that I have certain character attributes. And those character traits can be a good thing if I stick with them over time. They kind of become part of my personality, right? But if I have an outcome orientation, like I will make $1 million in a week, you know, maybe if somebody is like a real estate agent and the probability of them doing that because of past experience and the situation they're in, it's likely that they would do it. But even if they don't, if they get hurt and it gets pushed back a day, right? And then they plan all their finances based on that $1 million happening on Tuesday or something like that. Like the way that they plan things and their expectations have created some problems for them, right? So I think it's important that we understand the notion of rigidity. When it comes to visualization, what I'm talking about here is more about if I've behaved in a way that's not ideal and the consequences of my behavior have given me, the outcome of that is not good for me or other people. What I can do is I can reflect on what occurred, right? I can look at the time in the past and then identify what the things are that are in my control. So this is in your control. This is outside of your control. And I can modify my behavior, right, of what's in my control, such that whatever I can contribute to the situation or event has been either reduced or eliminated or made better. And so in like certain surgeries, the recovery process is dramatically increased if the person visualizes doing physiotherapy, like going for a walk. And the more detailed their visualization is, the more likely they'll go through with the exercises. And in sports, when they really visualize the activities and the actions, they're more likely to perform those actions.
So you talk about process orientation and outcome orientation. That's interesting because some people talk about these two things, and some say that being process oriented is superior to being outcome oriented because it's like you're focusing on the sort of basically the journey rather than the result.
Yeah.
Do you have the same view, or do you think that it really depends on that? Like which one is better? It really depends on the situation, or you're inclined towards one of these ways, like process orientation versus outcome orientation.
Yeah, like I definitely agree with that. That's why I'm mentioning it, right? And we studied this in the David book, Feeling Good. Outcomes are goals, and there's ways that we can structure the goal so it's attainable. So it's focused on the process, right? And it's realistic about, you know, like if I want to fly, like a bird does, humans don't do that. So having that as a goal is just crazy. You just tell that person you're psychotic, like you're crazy, right? Or you're suffering from psychosis. Doesn't make sense. Why would you say that?
That's what they told the right from.
Well, but that's mechanical,
Yeah.
right? So when you look at the physics of how airplanes work, there's a way for that to be achieved, right? I'm not just.
So I was just saying.
You have a point?
Yeah, James Clear also mentions the process versus outcome orientation in Atomic Habits. He's like, build habits based on identity and not on outcomes. Because if your outcome is to train for a marathon, let's say, you start training every day for the marathon, and that marathon comes along and you finish the marathon, your habit falls apart after that because you achieved your goal. So you don't really have that internal motivation to do so anymore. But if you do it as a identity-based habit, you'll say, I am a runner. So you continue to become a runner on the marathons along the way. That's an outcome of your identity. And so be it. But it's the same concept where create habits and goals based on identity rather than outcome.
That's cool.
I think the metaphor of the sports like running, right? Or like marathon, right? I think it's like the caveat could be if someone is like, okay, just process oriented and they just come too loose or they don't care enough. It's like, basically people who are like, whatever happens is okay. I think that's sort of like having that result final state in mind and sort of integrating it with being flexible as well, like being process oriented. It makes sense to me.
To like have both.
Yes, integration of both. Sort of like you're focused on the result just to sort of create a space where you can sort of, let's say we are in a room, right? It's a closed space, right? And the closed space, when you put energy, you can increase the pressure, right? So I'm thinking about it the same way. If you're focused on a result, and that's like you create your room. And when you increase the energy, it's like you can increase the pressure, increase the intensity. It makes sense to me. I don't know how to exactly say it, but
You have to keep on updating your goals there. Have like a goal ready to go once that one is like coming close. For example, mental goal. Or keep the motivation. Is that how you like the goal and the motivation?
the goal is the motivation.
Like the outcome.
I need to think about it. I want to find better ways to express it. So let me think about it a little bit.
We'll get back.
We could spend time talking about that, like just that in itself, right? And the construction of healthy goals. And yeah, okay, so goals and whatnot, right? And so so visualization is a way that we can continually try to increase our success within situations, right? Now, waiting is like a situation we could be in. So there's certain things that can happen in waiting. So like, is there any examples? How waiting, and the emotion tied to this would be anxiety. Predominantly our perception here, feeling, or as Burns calls it, our cognition, is gonna be a major contributing factor to relieving unnecessary negative emotions while we're in a specific experience, right? And so like, so some situations are like joblessness, immigration, health related things, relationship stuff, right? It could just be like the attainment of goals in general, which is like a function of, and also like a function of our growth as a person, like sometimes I'll become frustrated with myself because I'm like, I want to be up here, but I'm here right now. And I just want to be there. Like, why am I like, it's like, what? How many more years? Is it ever going to change? And so depending on how I look at it, I could generate unnecessary anxiety. Because in one sense, we can evaluate our emotion by saying, how is this, what I'm feeling? This is the ambiguity thing, or how is this feeling, right? When I just say, how is this emotion helping me in my situation? Because if the anxiety, remember in the David Burns book, there was the procrastination chapter, the do nothingism, right? And the person just wouldn't get out of bed because they were so upset. They would just stay in bed all day. And there was an example of like the accountant who like their clients were like gonna fire him, because he wasn't doing his job. And so there's different techniques in the David Burns book that it goes through, right, on how to test reality using things like successive approximation from a behavioral standpoint, on how we can get better at improving our ability to do things for ourselves. And sometimes our judgments of doing stuff in that situation of waiting may be slightly distorted, right? So I may just give up on doing everything, even though there's things that I like to do. And if we, just one second, if we have like a meter of like how we feel, you know, and like, you know, I'm like down here somewhere, like -70, right? It might be that the weighting is like 40 units of anxiety. Yeah. You know, and so it's taking up a big chunk of how I feel every day. So my mind is being sucked up by this, you know, or I'll be in a relationship with somebody and that person maybe like throw it, like if you think of it like, you know, the warmer the water is, the better, the more positive you are. And they're throwing ice cubes in your bucket, right? It's reducing the temperature, right? It's making you more upset. And so if you're with somebody and they do or say things and it affects you, one thing you can say is maybe it's not something that's ought to affect me, right? Maybe I am perceiving this in a way that's a problem. But the other side, it could just be that this person, their behavior or whatever, is just something that's not good for you. And so you don't want to like label them or generalize them in any way. But it is the case that if they're unable to regulate themselves, taking space from them is just the best option. Right?
Taking space.
Like not talking to them.
You associate, sorry.
Getting rid
You know?
Kind of does this weird thing.
So you could be waiting for things to get better in this relationship. You know? And that's not necessarily good, right? Because it's not up to you. It's out of your control. It's this other person that's doing it. Because you're saying something?
Yeah, where you associate anxiety and the negative part of
Yeah.
that range, I guess, the positive and negative,
Mhm.
can also be healthy anxiety.
That's true.
Like, how would you classify them differently? It's like the same thing in a way, but it's like a healthy one and unhealthy one.
It would be how you use it. If the anxiety is motivating you to act and it's not debilitating, right? Then it's a good use. You can almost call it like excitement in that sense. But if the anxiety is preventing me from doing things that are in my interest, and if it's compromising my relationships with other people, then that's not a good thing, right? She's smiling. What are you smiling over there for? It's a healthy
I
smile.
never associated anxiety with positive things.
Well, I'm using it in the context of motivation, right? Sometimes, like learning organizational behavior, one may not be motivated to learn an organizational behavior textbook until they got the anxiety from taking a class and having to do an exam. And then they're like, "Grr." But now that they have the knowledge from that source, right? The anxiety's function in that situation was actually good, depending on how they used it. Now, some students, if they go out drinking and then can't study anymore, right? That's not a good use of their anxiety, because the anxiety, so we talk about the events. So like, let's say the person has an exam, right? And they feel anxiety from this event. And so the response is study, drink, and then other things. Like there's avoidant behaviors, or there's behaviors to directly deal with whatever the thing is, right? And so part of it is like a habit on how to respond to certain kinds of events. And you can get better at that, right? One second. I feel that there's information that you can say that is relevant to this discussion. Am I covering it well or no? I think I'm missing some stuff.
When the outcome is unknown, like when there is an uncertainty,
Mhm.
do we have to process things in a different way, or?
Okay, so this is good. Event situations and then outcomes would be like another one. I would put that right here, but we can't. So I'm gonna go outcome. Often the outcome is unknown. So there's a certain degree of probability. And we still may not even really know what that is. And that might not even help us. If it's like 90% success rate, there's still 10%, and you could fixate on that, right? And the distortion of maximization, you know what I mean? Like really focus on it. And be like, oh, I only have a 10% chance to live or be successful or whatever, you know? So it goes back to what's in our control and what's not in our control. And so the next module that we were going to do, the next course, was Stephen Covey's thing. When you guys buy the book, I'll do the course. See you right now. $20. Boom. Look at her. She's like, yeah.
Which one?
Do you already have the book?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you did.
Which one? By Stephen Covey?
The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So the first habit is being proactive. And what he talks about is the only way to be proactive is to make decisions about things that are in your control. I cannot make a decision. I can change my attitude or my cognition about things that are out of my control, but I can't do anything about it. It's not within my boundary, right? And so what he says is you want to, it's very stoic, you Epictetus, you want to place your emotions in the realm of things that you have control over. Because that's a healthy use of your emotions, right? And so, yeah, okay. I still haven't solved your problem yet, though. So
No, I think it's good.
I don't think it's good. So when the outcome is unknown, right, that goes out of our control, right? Like, will the asteroid hit the planet in 150 years? It's like, that's astrophysicists don't even really know right now. Right, so how am I supposed to do it? Right? There's a possibility because it's the closest one we know of so far. Stoicism, I think, is useful here, you know, as like some philosophy from the books. And specifically, it's like Epictetus. And maybe Marcus Aurelius. And what we're really doing is we're not allowing ourselves to be upset. And I'm telling you guys this stuff so you can remind me when I'm not being stoic. And in the moments when I need to hear it. And how do we do that? We can talk about that. And so what that really means is like, if it's out of my control, what am I going to do? So in the movie, The Peaceful Warrior, which is part of our Philosophy Society kind of curriculum of films, haven't seen it yet, but we're going to watch it again at some point. Those guys said they were going to set up the thing. We're waiting on that. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, whatever. And so he says, the young man's name is Dan, and he's talking to his mentor, who's the character in the movie. His name is Socrates. And Dan is training to go in the Olympics. Or he's not in it yet, but he's training to become a gymnast in the Olympics. And Socrates says, what if you don't make it into the Olympics? Right? And Dan's like, he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, how dare you even say that to me? Right? Like, it's never even crossed his mind that he may not end up in the Olympics. And so it's an unknown outcome, right? And the way that he is, over here, the way he's developing his expectations, there's being ambitious about what we want as the outcome and doing things to get ourselves there, right? So part of the problem where I can't respond to what you're saying is because I don't know what is going on, which is fine. I don't expect you to say it in this context. No. If I did know, like, for example, if it was like attainment of goals or health, right? Like, let's say somebody is going through chemotherapy, right? Like extreme situation, you know? And obviously their life or a loved one is even better because it's completely, it's not even you, somebody else, right? A loved one is going through chemotherapy and they don't want the person to die, obviously, right? So what they can do is they can ensure that everything that's in their control, that they do something about that. So for example, like being in the hospital, as long as it doesn't compromise like work or their health, that's one thing. Trying to maintain positive relationships and positive emotions with the person. That's something that you can do, right? Focusing on the positive experiences that they had in the past. That's something you can do, right? Trying to help them regulate their stress. You can do that. You could do some research on the type of cancer, right? That's something in your control. But fundamentally, as long as whatever is in your power of decision making and action, you can do those things and you can utilize your feelings. That's like we talk about anxiety. and use our anxiety to motivate us to do those things. Part of the thing is how I'm perceiving this outcome. And then telling yourself, as long as I do everything I can in my power, then I'm free now. Right? I don't have to worry about nothing. Like, I'm good to go, fundamentally. If I write an exam and I'm waiting to see what my grade is, as an easy example, right? There's nothing I can do after I've written the exam. And so I could be in this stage of waiting over time for who knows, maybe 2 weeks, maybe like a month. It could be a long time that I'm waiting, right? But because there's nothing I can do about it, I have to kind of just let it go. And so another technique in this process, right? So we have visualization for outcome, right? To change things would be like the meditative practice. And the purpose of this is to let go, right? Because if our attention and fixating on the thing with our mind is causing anxiety, but that anxiety has no object, has no function for the person and what they're doing with their decisions or their actions, then the anxiety is just like unnecessary suffering, right? It's not actually going to help the person. So what they would do is they would teach themselves to just and what you're doing is you're focusing your attention and your mind on something that you do have, which, for example, is the present moment. And even though there are these other outcomes and all of these things that we want to do, like I'm going after it, all you really need is like right here. Like if you were in the middle of being tortured and eaten alive, then the present moment kind of sucks. It's like, no, it's not.
We just figured this out real quick.
You know, that's going to suck a little bit. Then the present moment, I can't really use that in the same way as a means to disengage from the future. In that sense, the future might be a more pleasant place for you to be. Think about all those beautiful things that used to go on, right? Like, however I got myself in this position, fuck, this sucks. But in our society, it's generally the case that that's not going to happen. That's why we like this democracy. We're like, all right, you know, this is great. You know, whereas 500 years ago, you're on your farm with your loved ones, and then a band of people that just want to take your shit and all the things that matter to you, and you know, not good. So we created this civilization in such a way to kind of prevent those things from happening, right? And it's good. I think that's a good thing. There are problems with our current government. We can talk about that. However, it's better than it's ever been. In every other time of history, it's basically been worse than it is today. We can talk about how there's better technology that's used to kill more people. I get that. I understand. But whatever.
We're getting efficient in every way.
Yes. Okay. So have I addressed it now? So what's the solution?
The meditative, to let it go,
And why?
because it gives anxiety, but that is not useful.
Okay, you're getting like 100% right now. This is perfect. Very good. And why is the anxiety not useful?
Because it doesn't bring anything good, or it doesn't work toward the goal, the outcome, and it doesn't give good positive emotions. So
Very good. And anxiety can be useful when?
Imagine.
Very good.
Survival.
Yes. Very good. Right? Sometimes if anxiety was useful before the exam, why?
To get things going, to start studying,
Bam!
to get into action.
And if I study, what is the most likelihood for the outcome? It goes up, right? And so that's how we want to utilize when we feel something. So, okay, I'll do a quick review because you came in late.
Sorry, guys.
No, it's okay.
I was studying, actually.
There you go. That's fucking awesome. Okay, so today we were talking about feeling, right? And I asked the group if there was any subject that it would be good for me to cover. And so someone brought up, well, what about waiting, right, as a situation, right? And so I wanted to distinguish between emotions and feeling. Because sometimes people will say, oh, I feel bad, or I feel like shit. Right? Really what they mean to say is, I have the emotion of sadness, right? And feeling is almost the same as awareness. I'm aware of my sadness, or I'm aware of sadness over time in unrealistic situations, which is like depression, right? And so we have the person, right? And then there's the mind. We have feelings, and sometimes our mental feelings affect our body. Like you can have chest tension, or you can like shake and stuff with anxiety.
Apparently, like with sadness, when it comes on, like the feeling of sadness, it actually affects you only for I think 20 or 40 seconds. And then after that, it's actually your decision.
That's
to
interesting.
being sad.
Okay, very good. So that's a point of control. And so there could be an event that I'm aware of that is creating some emotion, right? And there may be situations that I'm presently in, or I could reflect on them, or I could project into the future. This is where I may face. And I can use visualization as a means to approach myself to the most ideal way to deal with the situation, right? How best to act, what's the best outcome, and you're looking at the consequences. So sometimes we can be process or outcome oriented. So if I'm fixated on an outcome that's unrealistic, then I can get upset with myself because I haven't achieved the outcome, right? Or my assessment or evaluation of getting there was just a little off, right? If I'm focused on the process, it's focused on my habits, or as Dimitri brought up, my identity. I am a runner, therefore I run, right? And we talked about rigidity briefly, which is, about not being able to change my beliefs towards a more realistic set of beliefs. Okay, emotions. And then the other thing with when we do feel emotions, what do we do about it? So I'm going there next. And there is a notion of group feelings. When someone's upset, they come into the room, we kind of all feel that, assuming we have functioning mirror neurons. And meditation is a method, like visualization, that we can use to allow ourselves to come back to a sense of self that is stable within the moment. If the moment's a little fucked, then maybe you have to do something else, like dissociation. And that's a way, that we can alleviate negative anxiety that's not being used in a constructive way, right? Sometimes our mind is being taken up by a big chunk because of some event or situation we're in. And we can evaluate different situations like joblessness, immigration, health, relationships, goals, and our own personal growth, such of how much of our mind it's occupying, how much emotional energy am I using on this or wasting. And to say that I'm using it means that it is a means to an end to achieve some kind of an outcome or desired state, right? It's not just endless suffering. And so it may be the way I'm looking at the situation. These reviews are good, right? For everybody. It may be how I'm looking at the situation, which is my perception or cognition or event that could be generating negative emotions. Or it could be determining what is in my control, which is here, right? Whatever's inside my control, that's something I can do something about, like my own habits. But if I've done everything and my mind is fixated on the outcome that's unknown, that could just be endlessly generating anxiety because there's nothing I can do about it. And so what we want to do is we want to focus on the now. And sometimes this is like an interesting thing I think about sometimes, like when you were younger, like 10 years ago, you wanted all this shit. Like, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. And then you're going through your life, you're like doing shit, right? And then now it's 10 years later, and you actually now have all that stuff. But now you're focused on other shit that you want. You're like, but now I want this and this and this. And so you've forgotten what it was like to not have everything you have now, and you really don't appreciate it in the moment. Right? So sometimes, and this is what the Dalai Lama talked about, there's some recent weirdness with the Dalai Lama. I'm not going to go there. But one of the positive things that it's
Now I want to know what's happening with Dalai Lama, but fine. I'll research it on my own time.
yeah, just Dalai Lama weirdness. I bet you it'll come up. Fuck. And
Wait, is it the kids thing?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. I know.
anyways, in like his happiness book or whatever, it's just gratefulness. Right? Is the general solution here. And so that's paying attention to things that you do appreciate in this current situation that you're in. And so even though you're on your way to some outcome, and this outcome is super important, if you focus on that, you're going to miss what's going on right now, that at one point in time, you wished you had it. And so another way to say this is, we're letting life pass us by. That's what that means.
But it's in a way, it also is the thing that propels us to live. This like, this the will to keep wanting more, the ups and downs, right? It's what keeps us alive. Right? I mean, yes, of course everybody can use a little bit more gratitude, but if we didn't want anything, what would be the purpose of being alive?
I feel like
Okay.
some of the things that you want, like some material.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, for sure.
Yeah, the motivation, right? For sure. Okay, good. Now I feel like I've solved. I don't even know what the problem is. Here's some situations, and here's kind of a basic rundown of the methodology on how we approach these situations. Now, let's go back to this part of things. Time are we at? So you can experience an emotion, or you can observe somebody else experiencing emotions, right? If it's you that's experiencing the emotion, we want it to be proportional. We want the consequences of the emotion to not have a negative impact on us, right? Like when we talk about impulse control, I'm excited to drink, and then once I start one, I drink the whole bottle, and now I'm causing all these problems in my life, right? So that's a misplacement of happiness, right? In that moment of lacking impulse control. When you feel this emotion, the first thing is awareness. So it's like, what am I feeling? Right? So on the website, this is stuff I talked about for a long time ago. I have the reflective mind map. And basically what it is like, how do we engage in the process of reflection? What is it that I really do? Right? And I go through like 8 different things, right? There's like how you feel in your body. There's like the people in your life. There's your physical environment. There's recent decisions you've made. There's your trajectory on your goals. There's all these things that could be affecting you. And that's the cause of why you're feeling this way. And so what I talk about is the object of emotion. What is the thing that the emotion is directed towards in your experience? Right? And when you understand what that is, now you can start to do something about it. Or you can say, this is not something to be done about. It is not something I can do anything about. Therefore, I'm just going to let it go. Right? And then we use the meditation practice. So the first step is being aware what is going on. Because if we get the situation where you have the person and they feel all weird, right? Their whole experience is all fucky, which happens. That's the thing. And then they just that's where this is the situation where ignorance is bliss is not a good thing. Like a drunken elephant just rampaging through a department store, probably not a good idea, right? It's not good. And so if they're unaware, the decisions they make are relative to that state. And maybe it is a good thing. Maybe something positive did happen. Okay, great.
Insurance money.
Okay, we can talk about that. I'm thinking like the person engaged in alcoholism, right?
Oh.
And then going out and then doing a bunch of shit because
I
they were.
actually thought of an elephant.
Oh,
Sorry, I don't think
that's
you
great.
get it.
That's okay. I need to laugh more. Please help me with that. So she's like, fuck. Sad, angry, anxiety, disgust, right? There's certain things that could be happening with an individual, and they're making decisions based on the feeling, and the feeling is a means to an end of whatever that decision was. But it's not actually responding to the way that they're feeling, right? So if this person's upset, like the upsetness is related to some other relationship, right? And they don't do anything about this. They just go and what the fuck's the term?
Escapism.
Yeah, like that's one thing, like avoiding, right? Or coping. Coping is like a wound that will never heal and you just cover it up. I'm just trying to get through the day and I just kind of do whatever I have to do, right?
This you're not addressing the actual problem.
Exactly.
You're masking it.
So that's why awareness is the first step. What is the object of the emotion? So I can understand what is it that is making me feel this way. Hello, my friend. We're going to get you a chair. Okay.
But then you're also addressing your problem with meditation because you're thinking about your problem when you're meditating.
Yeah. So we can talk about that. There's the letting go meditation, like mindfulness meditation, where I'm engaged in detaching from the world or from whatever my mind is ruminating on, if rumination is a problem. But then I can have focused, almost like a reflective meditation, where I focus on a thing and I let go of everything else. Right? So if I'm trying to solve a problem or understand something, right? Like when Yoda says, I will meditate on this. What are you talking about? I know it's a fictional character, but somebody wrote that, right? What are you talking about this? Right? What does that even really mean? To meditate on a thing. Because isn't that meditation supposed to be like no-mindedness? Like my mind is empty. But there is a function to understanding things, to utilizing my mind and not being distracted by other things that are going on.
Right, so two things. First, what would people do in boundary situations where someone doesn't know whether they have control over a situation or don't? It's like sort of, it's not clear whether there is control or it's not control.
Yeah.
So that could happen. The second thing is that if someone is process oriented, right, rather than outcome oriented, doesn't that, if you sort of go to the essence of it, doesn't it mean that that person needs to believe that something beyond their physical existence, even if they are dead, must exist? Because it is like, okay, process oriented, right? It's like, doesn't that, so if you believe in that, doesn't that show that you have some sort of a metaphysical belief?
For process orientation?
Yes. Because it's like you're believing that you're something beyond your body. That's why you're process oriented. Otherwise, it's like, why? Why would you do it? Do you get my reasoning?
Well, when I think about process, I think about like the process of nature or like our learning curve, for example. So if you want to learn figure skating, right, you're not just going to be like a champion figure skater like in the moment, like right away. It's going to take training. So focusing on the training itself, like my learning curve and how my behavior is developing over time, that is more useful, right, than being upset with myself because I haven't achieved the goal. So if my learning curve is going like this, and I want to be up here, and then I get angry because of this difference, that emotion is misplaced, right? Because I have an unrealistic expectation. Well, I can't judge myself for being up here because I'm just currently right there. And it's best for me to learn what is this last plateau? Like what is the nature of the gap between my current performance and where I want to be, right? So for example, I'm a vocalist. I sing, right? So I do. And some notes I currently cannot hit at this moment. And so if I'm like, I want to sing the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, and I can't do the first initial really high note, if I just get upset with myself because I'm not achieving the outcome, that's an unrealistic perspective on the nature of what it means to sing, right? Whereas if I look at the process and I say, I am a 3 notes too low in this training, so I'm going to focus on training those notes over the next week, and then lo and behold, a week later I can actually hit the note. That's more constructive because my emotions are translating into motivation, translating into a behavior or an action plan that's achievable or getting me to the goal.
All right. Can I make an extreme example? Because sometimes they're useful. So let's assume that you're in an island and you know that you're alone, right? You will not survive. You will be dead, right? And you know that. Now, would you try your best still, despite that, to survive?
Of course, your body is automatically made to survive. Even if you're suicidal, you will do anything to survive at this point.
That's cool. I respect that.
I think so too. I mean, yeah, we said for survival on this.
It's not about your mind at this point. I think it's about your
Thoughts.
body.
Well, it depends on what you constitute like well-being. If my well-being is necessarily tied to my relations to others, then you don't have a reason to live. But if I can find a way to live just by myself, and I can appreciate my experience, and there's well-being to be achieved on that island alone, then of course right? And I don't know, again, what evidence are we gonna draw here, like, to support this
I
argument?
think we'll go with adaptation. Like, for example, like at one point you're gonna have that mental breakdown because you're alone and you're a social person. But at some point, I feel like preservation will kick in and being like, okay, you're alone. There's no one coming. You will have to self-preserve. I think at one point that will hit, or you will just do the basic requirements. When you're gonna get super hungry, depending, some people like me, I can't go like a day without eating. I need to eat. But some people will get depressed and they won't eat for a few days, but then they'll still do something to eat something.
Mhm.
If you're on an island, there's still some edible sources of food, I would say. So yeah, you might not, like, I wouldn't say anyone is going to die within the first 30 days. I don't think so.
It depends on the island too.
Yeah, yeah, obviously. Yeah, I'm thinking like a
Depends on the
nice
situation.
tropical vacation island.
It's like there's a bar here, like, great.
And I
So,
think like all of the human beings, we all have hope.
Yes.
So even though you were yourself by yourself on the, on the island, you still have a hope. Then, something happened and, somebody gonna find you or
it's true.
until you're out of the resources.
Yeah.
Until you lose them.
There's a reason why hope is in the Pandora's box. I'm just saying.
Okay. So I think it depends on like our assumptions of human nature, like core fundamental properties of our own sense of self-preservation. If you want to think of a different thought experiment, we can go through that one. If I unintentionally dodged the question or what you're trying to get at, because I'm not trying to do that.
I think it was the answer that satisfactory to me.
Okay.
What I meant was like there is no hope for living. But you mentioned that you thought of it as there is no hope for interacting with others.
Yeah.
That was so good.
What about that movie Carried Away or
Castaway.
whatever? Castaway.
What was it, Wilson?
He makes Wilson. Yeah, like, that's human nature.
That's true.
I would say.
Very good. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so the first step, so we're talking right now, when we have feelings, these emotions, when I feel something, feeling is, I'm using it as analogous to awareness. I'm aware of something. Because sometimes what I feel could be ambiguous. I'm not really sure what I'm feeling. And it may be a mix of these things because there's a bunch of shit going on. I have many situations I'm experiencing. And through my reflective process, through some form of meditation on the website, I have 3 different kinds and I explain them. And there's videos on how to meditate under the counseling tab. I can start to kind of like separate out. So if we have like a pie graph, this is all my feelings. I can like separate out what these little feelings are, right? So I have like anger, I have some sadness here, a little bit of whatever, some anxiety. And then when I'm like, okay, I'm fucking anxious right now, right? So, what is going on? I can extrapolate and say, well, what are the things that are generating this anxiety? Well, there's this one person in my life that might make me a little anxious. There are the things that they did. And then I take one of those things. Like something comes to mind. I'm not going to say it, but it comes to mind. And then I say, well, what am I in control of here? I'm not in control of them, that's for sure. But I am in control of whether I choose to invite them out, for example. Right? Maybe I'm just not going to hang out with them anymore. And then that way, this specific thing that they did is not going to affect me. Because the term for this is a boundary. I'm saying, I'm not going to accept this. I sense myself through my awareness, and this is part of the general topic of self-love, right? If you don't love yourself, nobody else can do that for you. People can love you, but it's different than like self-love. Like it's like a fountain that, it comes out of you because it's something that goes out into the world through your decisions and your actions, and you are doing stuff, right? There's being selfish and there's doing things that are in your self-interest, and they're different. Being selfish is like taking away from somebody, like my friend's like about to eat a pear, and I'm like, fuck you, and I eat it. Like that would, like that was supposed to, I was supposed to eat that thing, right? And you were selfish in this moment, meaning that you took something away from me, because zero-sum scarcity mentality, right? There's only so much in the world, and I'm psychopathically going to go around and disregard other people and then steal from them, right? Okay, that's one thing. But self-interest is doing what's important for my growth, independent of other people, because I can make a decision. I don't have to take from other people or whatever for my growth and survival, right? So that's like an abundance mentality. Okay, so through our awareness, we determine what our feelings are. What am I feeling? This part is kind of important to understand how we're feeling. What am I experiencing before I really get into other people? Because my capacity for empathy will be a little bit depreciated if I'm like the elephant running through the shop, right? This person pissed me off. I'm going to get drunk. Just fucking boom. That's what's happening. And then my decisions in that state are relative to how I got into that state or whatever I'm doing, or impulse shopping, right? Or whatever the fuck it is, you know?
What happens if you have too much empathy and you put others before yourself?
Yeah, so
They say you can't help someone else if you don't love yourself.
So the self-love thing is, and this is a hazard in relationships and stuff like that, right? Is we got to kind of make ourselves at least 51%, right? Because sometimes someone might be in a dire situation of need, and it is important to be pro-social, to be there for each other, right? Because if we're not, then the world can become quite a lonely place, and we're just all off on our own. And the reason that we're here, Robert Wright talks about, is through cooperation. All societies and cultures that learn to cooperate and don't engage in like crazy wars and fuck with each other, they're more likely to survive. Part of it is like having a sense of self, that there's a difference between you and the other. This is like I'm not talking about metaphysics, but you know, there's an existential distinction here that is important to understand. Because if you exist for the other, there's nothing that will sustain your existence. It's an incoherent way of living. You have to exist for yourself because nothing else can. You can talk about God and stuff like that, but then we can just test this theory out. And if you just say, God will put food in my belly, just like you said, eventually you're going to starve and you're going to fucking eat something, right? You have to exist for yourself. And if you want to translate it in God terminology, God gave you the power to make decisions so that you could feed yourself, because God's got more important shit to do. God is fighting the gods you don't even know exists in these crazy, you know, universe battles of godliness. It's beyond Thor. It's beyond Thor.
Mentions beyond their comprehension.
It's beyond our comprehension. And so the existential battle between square and circle, you know, it's like, what is happening here? Only God knows. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Kings.
See you again.
Enjoyed the session. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
So there's going to be a whole process of self-love and the way I structure my life, right? Like a way of living or a lifestyle. And so that's like a whole thing, and how I relate to people. There's going to be a whole process there. We can talk about that. That's you got to break that one down a bit, you know, unpack it, as Sam Harris says. So, okay. So we become aware of our feelings. I know what I'm feeling. Now, the second thing is we're going to talk about the control versus what's not in your control. Something in our control, meaning that I have some volition. There's some capacity of willpower and action together that I can do about that. So we have like an XYZ axis. There's the human being in there. This is reality. There's some shit in reality that you have an influence over. There's some things you can do, right? That's just the nature of being human. But putting this into action, I know there's this over time. It's like the same thing repeated, you know? Putting this into action in a healthy way is part of what it means to have well-being and live in the world and in a way that's good for you, right? So once you determine what's in your control, then there's the decisions. I guess because there's like maybe reflective. I don't know. Yeah, there is also a spot for like modifying your beliefs. I don't know where I'm gonna put that somewhere. Because maybe the way I'm seeing the world is a little off, right? And so I'm gonna have to evaluate my perspective, my philosophy, or whatever it is, and change it. That's part of the component. That might be a subheading of the awareness component, because there's the present thing, but then there's this mind thing. This invisible helmet that we walk around with as humans that guides us, right? And it may be accurate, it may not be accurate. And so we need to have some kind of a modification mechanism to change properties of the mind. That way it can be used to navigate reality more effectively. Now that's tough. That's where like having a counselor or a therapist, that might be useful for that, or some kind of a group where it can give us an alternative form of awareness, right? And so, however we structure this, but once we get to the decision action part, there's going to be some iterative process and an approximation process where you get closer to your outcome or your goal, which means that I'm not going to feel like shit anymore, right? I don't have anxiety in the same way as I used to, right? Because I found a healthy way to structure, for example, this relationship or my position at work, how I manage my time, you know? So that's the self, okay? And there's a bunch of stuff that will have an effect on that. Now, when we observe somebody else who's upset, so let's say someone's angry, right? So remember this. So there's self, and then the self is observing this other person who's angry. So the first step, in some ways, is there's their experience, they're utilizing the anger as a form of communication, right? Because maybe explaining things rationally with just language like a textbook doesn't work. So what's happened now is we've increased the intensity of the message. It's like I put a loudspeaker on so you can hear me a bit clearer, right? That's the function of someone having an angry outburst a lot of the time, right? Not that it might be uncomfortable that this is happening, but we want to understand the nature of why it is they're behaving this way, right? Why are you upset? And what can I do as the other person to help facilitate, to like massage out this knot in your muscle, this emotional knot, so that your well-being increases because they care about you, right? That's why they're upset. They're expressing it to you because there's some relationship there, you know? So you observe the other person, they're angry. Really the question you really ask about is the object of emotion. So you can infer yourself, and David Burns goes through the disarming technique, right? The first step is empathy. The next step is agreement. And the third step is to negotiate. So you can say, I really understand how you feel betrayed or you feel abused that this other person was doing X, Y, and Z. Is that correct? Like, oh, yeah. So they shake it off a little bit. That's exactly why I'm pissed off right now, right? What that means is you've accurately identified the object of emotion. This is the thing that has triggered them to be upset, right? And the outburst of anger is really just an explanation of what it felt like for them and their subjective experience to go through this experience, whatever that might be, right? And so once you get past that stage, right, then you can discuss how to manage things differently. And that's where it enters in the distortion talk. If from the very beginning, you start throwing the distortion like ninja star at them while they're angry, that's like telling them to stop being angry. That's like jumping in front of a speeding car. That's not going to work out for you, right? You have to just redirect that energy, right? Help facilitate it like a pipe, and then just kind of spray it all over the place, and then it'll die down, right? And it'll be easier if you understand what the source of the emotion is, which is the object of emotion. And then in the negotiation stage, you can say, well, what do you think is the best way to prevent you from getting upset like this in the future? Because it's not good for you when you get upset like this. I'm explaining to you what to say to me when I'm upset like that. So I was upset with somebody and I was venting in his eye. So, does that make sense? So what are the steps? I know. Do you know what the steps are? The steps are is to identify what the object of emotion is. Why is the person upset? Right? And you may not be able to ask right away because their brain is all limbic system. It's not even intelligible to them in that moment. And so they may just be saying shit that doesn't make sense, but then you'll notice that the intensity, right? If you have like a little chart here, the intensity of their emotion will slowly go down over time. Right? And you can say little things to help accelerate this process, to like depressurize the person. Right? Well, what I still don't understand it. Why are you upset though? Like what happened? I want to understand. Can you please explain to me? I just want to know what happened to you. And then when the person feels that, they'll be like, oh, like they feel that you actually care. Right? Currently, you're super abrasive and you're being a bit of an asshole. However, right, what happened to you is legitimate, clearly, because you're upset about it. And so let's try to understand it together. What is it that happened, right? Why are you so upset? And this is part of what I would do as counselor, if that's what the person is going through. And then once you get to the third stage in the disarmament technique of the negotiation, you can plan things together and then try to structure it so they don't put themselves in a situation where they're necessarily just going to fucking get pissed off, right? And that's just the same thing as a boundary. Whether you're doing it for yourself, there's this kind of process like this, or whether it's with some other person.
Facilitate.
Yeah, facilitation is like the guiding. It's like taking a hot ember and just like, I'm facilitating this to this spot. I'm not going to touch it with my hand. Okay, one last thing I want to say, this is on a different subject entirely, is Elon Musk has talked about how it's a good thing that humans die because it flushes our system of all the bad ideas and people that think crazy shit, and then new ideas can be generated. New people, because people will hold on to their ideas forever, right? It's the rigid thinking process. It's hard for them to change. And so I was reflecting recently on the current wars, right? And some of those ideologies are persistent, like Putin's desire to rebirth the Soviet Union, for example, and kill lots of people in that process, right? Or China's like desire to reclaim Taiwan. You know, it's like in their legislation that it's part of China. And so Elon Musk says there's inevitably going to be some kind of conflict because it says in the Chinese legislation that this is what we're going to do. And that's bad because the United States is bound to Taiwan to protect them, right? And so one of the things he said in the recent interview that I posted in our chat group was in response to the Israel-Hamas issue. And he's like, what Hamas has done is they've engaged in heinous acts that will really, really piss off Israel so that Israel over-responds and overreacts. And what that will necessarily do is rally all of the Muslim countries against Israel, which is kind of what's happening. And so he says, what you could do is inconspicuous acts of kindness, completely clear demonstrations of being good, right? So that people can't say you're bad. So when the United States nuked Japan at the end of World War II, that was a time when they were the only country with nuclear weapons. And if they wanted to, they could have taken over the entire world. The United States, they could have done this. And they chose not to. Instead, what the United States did is they helped rebuild the world and let everybody be on their own. So a lot of people will talk shit about the United States, which we can talk about them and critique them and evaluate them. But I think that is actually a very sound argument, which may be a representation of the people who were in power at the time, right? But when we take the idea, so Thomas Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he said that when ideas change, it's because the old people that hold on to those paradigms died with them. And a paradigm shift, a change in ideas, occurs when the new generation who has critiqued the old way of thinking, they come up and they say, this is the new way of looking at things. And so if we could maintain those inconspicuous acts of kindness in certain wars and just let it, like, just hold on as long as you can without, like, Ukraine has not really bombed any civilian targets at all in a year, which is a big deal. They're almost 2 years. And if you keep on maintaining that sense of kindness with also respecting your self-defense, eventually Putin and Trump will die. Right? They'll die. And also individuals that maintain the old Soviet Union mentality or the Chinese attachment to Taiwan. And then new generations, hopefully, can approach it with a more diplomatic, democratic kind of approach. And so I just want to say, that was an idea. Okay, people seem like they're tired now. Is there anything else you guys want to say?
I don't know, because when people die, like, new people emerge.
Mhm.
There's also the chance of even worse ideas coming.
Exactly. Generating
It could go both ways, yeah. But I think
the history actually repeats itself. So
it's in cycles.
And even if people die, some ideas stay because people write books and teach the former ideas.
But they also like see what happened in the past. Right? Like for example, like right now we're going through a recession. People are like looking back at the past recessions and depressions. And also it's kind of like, okay, like for example, like when you're depressed in like high school, you think like this is it, like this is the end of the world. But when you're depressed as an adult, you're like, c'est la vie, you know? You've seen this before, you know what makes you feel better, and you can control your emotions better. Right?
Very good. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, like, your arguments it's not necessarily true. It really depends on who you killed.
Okay.
So,
Or who dies on their own accord.
yeah, it's not like just because you killed women and children, you're gonna leave. You can pick and choose when you're killing them. And if you kill certain people, what's left will be the new choice. Things to move forward from normal. So it really depends on who you kill and not kill.
Mhm.
And like, if this was a religious war, it'd be a different story. If I don't know, like, it's hard to just sit in this room and justify killing people and say this is the right answer.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think in matters of self-defense or some of the capital punishment, the classic capital punishment, if someone is explicitly intending on going out and killing other people, you know, like a serial killer or someone who has a lot of access to military operations, you could justify that person being killed, I think. And there's governments justifying that or individuals justifying that. And if it's an individual being directed by the government, they would have to trust that the government's intel is sound and they're not being manipulated, which is a whole thing in itself. And if it's just you and you're there, you know, and like, you know, like you're going to have to make a decision on your own. And that decision is based on the consequences of murdering somebody. Right? And can you justify, like, for example, if I was out hunting and I had a farm and I knew of like a serial killer / rapist in the area of my village, and I was too far away to get to my farm and my family was in there, but I had my gun on me and that guy was going into my farmhouse, I would probably shoot him. So that's like an example of I don't have the ability to do anything but kill the person. And if I wait too long, it could be over by the time I get there. And the people that I care about, you know? So, and I would have to make that decision on my own and then accept the consequences if I was wrong. And so I think keeping in mind that killing innocent people is murder, and your judgment of innocence is something that you have to be able to make.
Well, I'm not saying people, they're, like, I will add that some people do need to die, so let's take your example. I'm not accusing you of anything, but let's say you and your family were Nazis who had killed people before, you know. But, you know, that was a long time ago, and now you're just sort of chilling. I mean, like, from your perspective, you're right, but, if you take it from another third party perspective, then, you know, it's
Sorry,
obviously
I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'm thinking like, you know, I'm not assuming that, like but that person wouldn't, in the example I was saying, the person going into the farmhouse, that person is the serial killer rapist. And it's like, you have like a wife and like some small kids, for example. But if it was like, you were a Nazi and it was an Allied soldier going in, then you would be justifying the Allied soldier going into the home. But I don't think the family would be responsible unless the wife was also a Nazi of those kind of people. It would more so be the husband.
well, yeah, like I would remove the kid from the equation because kids are kids or whatever, but I mean, the woman, the man, you know, that's fair game judgment.
Yeah.
You know, they're adults, they made a choice, so.
Yeah, I think that like capital punishment or like executing somebody in a lot of ways is contingent on their ability to commit the act again. Like if that's like the nature of self-defense, you know, like if they're in the act or they're about to commit the act versus we have a prison system that we could contain them. Because then maybe we can avoid problems of the corruption of the government.
I would say the only perk of capital punishment is like lowering the population,
Okay.
in my opinion.
I don't know if there's enough bad people that we would kill that would reduce it enough.
I mean, it depends on the guidelines, but yes, I mean, I would say like, I feel like people are capable of changing. We don't really need to kill people for them not to commit a certain crime. I mean, depends on the case, but you know, I would say.
I agree. Even if it was really, really tremendous, alright, fucked up case, even capital punishment, I believe, would be kind of doing them a favor in a way instead of them sitting with their mistakes and their thoughts for the rest of their lives.
Like unless it's like their own compulsion, like unless they're like a serial killer and they need to kill people, like yeah, it's a bit different, but still, like I feel like sometimes people just need to contemplate about what they.
Yeah. I think it's an assumption of the mental state of the person who's committing the crime,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
capacity to do it, and then the resources of the society. Like if we're like on the island, like we talked about before, you know, and then one person is just like eating people, you know what I mean? Like, and we know that they're the one, like we catch them in the act, we all saw it, you know, like,
Lord of Flies.
yeah, like, what are we gonna do, you know? And like, there's a utilitarian argument that the greatest happiness for the greatest number is the right thing to do. And risking, you know, the well-being of the entire tribe for this one person who's not of sound mind, you know, that's something we could, you know, I think in that sort of situation, obviously it would be a problem. And then there's the humane element to it too. Like, are you torturing them to death or is it like done as quickly as possible? You know?
Do they get their last supper?
Yeah. Well, there's not enough food for us. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. That was cool. I think it's good to talk about these things, to understand them, and I think it's entertaining at the same time. Any other ideas before we wrap it up?
Rehabilitation over punch.
Yeah. Sure.
Wait, what are they called? Those solitary dens?
Solitary confinement.
Yeah, instead of that, you get like meditation den.
Yeah, I think that like if you could screen psychopathology and like heinous people from when they're kids, you just send them into the monk career where they're just like meditating all the time and like they just see what happens, you know, and like how's that gonna work out, right?
Nature versus nurture.
They just kill all the guys in the fucking monastery. Damn it! Damn that experiment!
Next life.
Failed experiment. Okay, that was cool. Thank you guys.